Alright, grab your popcorn, folks, because we are watching the slow-motion car crash of the Conservative Party. And honestly, it couldn't happen to a more deserving bunch of traitors. What you're seeing in this clip isn't just a political defection, it's the death rattle of the establishment centre-right that has spent the last 14 years betraying the British people on borders, culture and sovereignty. Robert Jenrick jumping ship to reform UK is the moment the dam finally breaks. The Tories are terrified, the left is hysterical, and the actual right, the people who want to save this country, are finally getting the realignment we've been screaming for. Let's dive into the panic.
Right, should we talk to political commentator Matthew Stadlen and Reform Council leader Harrison Allman-Varty? Good to see you both this morning. Harrison, let's start with you on this one, because I'm intrigued as to your perspective, because there is this criticism that the party is becoming a little bit Tory 2.0. Does the defection of someone like Jenrick add to that, or is taking on board the professionalism worth the risk?
Good morning. I mean, it was a belter of a day for Reform UK yesterday. I think, to be honest, Nigel Farage is there to take on people that can add. That was the explicit thing from yesterday's conference. And I think there's no sort of spin that you can put on this, that this was a bad day for Reform. The fact that they've been able to basically take on the Conservatives' most popular Member of Parliament, not only just a Member of Parliament, but the Shadow Justice Secretary, over to Reform is huge. This will be the day that, yesterday will be the day that will be underlined in history, politics books when it comes to the realignment of the centre-right politics in this country. It was absolutely massive, and you'd have to do some serious mental gymnastics to put any other sort of negative spin on this Reform, which I think some left-wing commentators have been doing online. It's absolutely huge, and I think, Nigel is there to simply take on those that can add, and Robert Jenrick has a huge amount of experience that will help the party, both professionally and also from the back office perspective, so it's ready to run when it gets elected in 2029.
Matthew, do you consider Robert Jenrick a win for Reform UK?
This is, guys, good morning to everyone. This is just crazy analysis. Stephen, you say that Robert Jenrick is a solid figure. I can hear Conservative MPs chuckling into their cornflakes. He literally told, according to Camilla Tominey, your fellow GB News presenter, he literally told her days ago that he would never defect. This is a man that Nigel Farage himself publicly last August told us all, told the world, was a fraud. Nigel Farage said that he had always thought him to be a fraud.
So Robert Jenrick
himself. Let me just finish, please, without interrupting, if you could do me that courtesy. Robert Jenrick himself is reported in The Telegraph to have been telling Tory members last year that Nigel Farage couldn't even run a five-a-side football team. This is a man who had a very, very public and toxic spat with Zia Youssef, someone your viewers will also be familiar with, someone I've debated with man to man for an hour on GB News on Michelle Dewberry's show. I simply don't know who I feel more embarrassed for.
Did you hear the panic in Matthew Stadlen's voice? That is the sound of the Liberal establishment realising their controlled opposition is disintegrating. He's breathless, he's indignant, and he's trying to use the hypocrisy card because he has nothing else left in the chamber. He's bringing up old quotes where Farage called Jenrick a fraud or Jenrick insulted Farage's management skills, as if that actually matters in the trenches of political warfare. Let's get real for a second. Stadlen and his ilk loved the old arrangement. They loved a Tory party that was essentially New Labour in blue ties, weak on immigration, obsessed with net zero and terrified of the media. They are terrified of this defection, not because they care about Robert Jenrick's integrity, but because they fear a united right. They know that if the competence and machinery of the ex-Tory front bench combines with the populist firebrand energy of Farage and the angry electorate, the uniparty game is over. Stadlen calls it embarrassing, but what's actually embarrassing is the state the Tories left this country in. Of course, Jenrick and Farage traded insults in the past, that's politics, but notice how quickly that evaporates when the survival of the nation is at stake. Farage is a ruthlessly pragmatic operator. He knows he can't run a government with just enthusiasm and anger. He needs operators who know where the bodies are buried in Whitehall. And Jenrick is a career politician who can read a room. He knows the Conservative brand is toxic radioactive waste. He's not defecting because he had a sudden spiritual awakening. He's defecting because he knows the Tories are extinct. He's a rat swimming toward the only lifeboat that floats. The left screams hypocrisy because they don't want to admit that reform is rapidly becoming the only serious game in town for anyone who isn't a Marxist.
All right, how do you respond to that,
obviously
Harrison?
a typical reaction of someone who's devastated that they're seeing the mainstream parties melt before their eyes. I think it could be the literal saint coming across to reform, and I'm sure that they will say, oh yes, but this and that. I mean, it's a complete natural reaction. I get it. The world's crumbling in front of their eyes. It makes sense. Look, it was a massive win for reform. The membership's gone up. It's a particularly massive win for areas like I am in Surrey, where lots of voters who were thinking, oh, but if they win, would they know what they're doing, in the sense of absolutely. They've got such a team now where people who have, in fairness, right, I'm not giving it Robert a clean slate, but neither did himself yesterday. He said, look, there are failures. And I think the fact that he's able to recognise them internally is actually the reason why Nigel has gone perfect. It's that self-criticism to be able to go, look, we got it wrong, but I know what to do to get it right. It is essentially the USP here. And that is essentially why now Nigel's put that May the 7th deadline on. So anybody who is serious about wanting to actually help deliver for the party and therefore, in essence, the country later on, will have that opportunity now, but not later.
Sorry,
Harrison,
guys.
to Matthew's point, what does this mean for the dynamics and the relationships within reform? How happy is Zia Youssef to now see a number of Boris Johnson's cabinet come over to Reform UK? And where does it leave Nigel Farage? Does it not give you the sense that this is two very big fish in a very small pond?
Look, I'll be honest. If you look at from Robert Jenrick's point of view, he's gone from being tipped to be the next Conservative leader to joining Reform, where your prospects of being leader is nil because of just how the confidence of the party is in Nigel Farage. So I actually think in that sense that the point's null, because Robert Jenrick's actually gone, well, look, if I'm an opportunist, I'd obviously stay in the Tory party because I don't have to wait a few months. The May elections will go terribly for me, and I'll probably be leader once Kemi goes. So I think from an opportunist point of view, Robert was probably best off to sit in the Conservative Party and he'd have been promoted by default. The fact he's come over to Reform is, I genuinely believe what he said yesterday is that this is not about political ambition. It's about that shared value to help the country.
Sorry,
All right,
guys.
you two. I'm really sorry, Matthew. We're out of time. I wish we had longer, but good to see you both. Thanks very much indeed. Loads of you getting in touch this morning. Freddie says Jenrick's defection means Badenoch is now leading a party of one nation Tory wets who belong in the Lib Dems.
Karen says Jenrick was always coming over. Now it's just sooner. Welcome, Mr. Jenrick. I consider this a huge asset to Reform. Ian says vote Reform, get the same old Tories. Why would I bother?
Tim says Kemi is strong, but the Tories, sadly, are a sinking ship that even Captain Birdseye can't save.
Yeah. I got a text yesterday during that press conference by Robert Jenrick and Nigel Farage. Somebody saying that was the most important testimony that I've seen in a very long time. I'm impressed. And I said, what do you think? He said, in my eyes, this is a future Prime Minister that we're looking at. I think this is a big plus for Nigel.
It's interesting. I mean, it was an interesting insight, that whole idea of saying that they broke Britain. The Tories broke Britain as much as anybody else, and those discussions, what was happening in shadow cabinet, and the idea that people were sort of thinking more about the party than the country. What either not wanting to admit that Britain was broken or saying, well, it is broken, but we can't say it is. Which is, I mean, it's interesting. Anyway, look, you can have your say by becoming a friend of GB News for free.
And there it is. The quiet part said out loud.
The most damning indictment of the Conservative Party isn't that they lost, it's that they knew they broke Britain and were too cowardly to admit it or fix it. Stephen hits the nail on the head here regarding the shadow cabinet discussions. These people, the Badenochs, the Cleverleys, the Sunaks, presided over the absolute demolition of our national cohesion. They opened the floodgates to mass migration, they let our institutions get captured by woke ideology, and they decimated the economy. And behind closed doors, they admitted the country was broken. They knew it, but they prioritised the party over the nation. This is why the Jenrick defection is so symbolic. It validates everything we on the real right have been saying for years. We were called conspiracy theorists, racists and extremists for saying the country was being destroyed. Now you have their own former senior ministers essentially fleeing the crime scene and admitting the vehicle they were driving is a wreck. However, we need to be vigilant. Look at the viewer comments they read out. Tory wets, Lib Dems. That scepticism is healthy. We don't want reform to just become a lifeboat for the same people who sank the ship. Jenrick coming over is a victory in terms of optics. It humiliates the Tories, but the grassroots need to keep a very close eye on these defectors. We don't want their one nation rot infecting a movement built on sovereignty and populism. Jenrick says he wants to save the country. Fine, but he was in the room when the decisions were made to ruin it. He has a hell of a lot of penance to do. This isn't just about winning an election in 2029, it's about ensuring that when reform gets power, they don't just become the new management for the same old decline. The Tories broke Britain. Reform's job isn't to patch it up with Tory rejects, it's to rebuild it from the ground up. The landscape has shifted, the Tories are effectively dead walking, and the political battle lines are finally being drawn correctly. The globalist establishment versus the British people. Jenrick is just the first domino. There will be more. But as the rats flee the sinking ship, we have to make sure they don't chew holes in the new one. My question to you is this. Do you trust these defecting Tories to actually implement a reform agenda? Or do you think they're going to dilute the movement from the inside and turn it into the Tory light party we've been trying to destroy? Let me know what you think.